stay over here till 2025.
Awesome. All right, y'all. I think we are live and ready to get started. Okay, so hello, Sagnistas. Here we are. It is our last full group session for the day, and a big content block of CareerCon that we've been anticipating. So first, yay, I love the emojis. First, let me reiterate our deep and sincere appreciation for our panelists here today and the International Center for Professional Development. And of course, for our industry partners, this event is only possible with your partnership, so thank you. Now it is time for our Fireside Chat. Our goal is to take the conversation a layer deeper. I am honored to support this session. This really is the heart of SACNAS, Sagnistas talking to Sagnistas, deeply, openly, from a place of authenticity and vulnerability. This is what we are about, sharing wisdom in community. So I want to take a moment to frame this conversation for the group. We are aiming for intimacy and authenticity. All of you, our participants, are here in a moment of growth and change, looking forward to your next steps, perhaps with wide-eyed eagerness for some, perhaps with nervousness and uncertainty. But our goal in this conversation is to shine light on the specifics of the path from those just a bit further along in the journey. The feelings, the highlights, the ahas, the how-tos, etc. So yesterday, you identified and reflected on your strengths, both on your own and with one another. You heard from various professionals on how to apply those strengths to your job search. Today, you heard more about how to contextualize the private sector and situate yourself in it. Today, or I should say now, we'll build on that work. We'll hear a candid conversation among our Sagnistas here, some real talk, if you will, from these wonderful speakers who have been where you are. This is not a panel. Instead, this is a conversation, a chat between our speakers and you all, a chat within the SACNAS familia. So please feel free to put your thoughts in the chat as they surface for you. Keep it up with the emojis. I personally love that. And actually, after this session, there will be a Q&A where you can ask questions directly. So jot those down now. We won't be looking at the actual Q&A panel here, but it'll be right after this. So with that, we can get started with brief intros. Bria, would you like to introduce first? Bria joins us as Scientific Program Manager for Training and DEI at Stanford. Welcome, Bria.
Hi, yes, thank you, Daniela, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me. My name is Bria Castellano. I use they, them, their pronouns, and I'm currently at Stanford, where I'm leading training programs and DEI initiatives for Interdisciplinary Research Institute that spans and engineering, all with efforts of pushing the research done in an academic lab out into clinical trials or out into startup and private sector. Just some background for myself. My parents are immigrants from the Philippines, and I've been involved with SOCNA since 2010. And it's been a real great pleasure to be part of SOCNA. I was able to get a bachelor's from San Jose State and a PhD in molecular and cell biology from UC Berkeley before I did my postdoc at Genentech, which is a biotechnology company in South San Francisco. And I'm very excited to share my perspectives and really learn from the other people here at the Fireside Chat as well.
Welcome, Bria. We also have joining us Yadira Perez Paramo, a Drug Development Training Fellow at Genentech. Welcome, Yadira.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me as a panelist or as a speaker in this session. I'm really looking forward to be part of this conversation. A little bit about my background. I'm an immigrant from Mexico. I came here to get my PhD in pharmaceutical sciences at Washington State University. I did an internship at Genentech and then during my PhD. And after that, after I finished my PhD, I joined the company as a drug development training fellow. And currently, I work in the Omnivd department, and I do biomarker development, specifically clinical proteomics.
Excellent. Welcome. And next we have a familiar face, Dr. Ana Vergara. Welcome back. Do you want to introduce yourself real quick, just again for everyone?
Yeah, hi everyone. It's nice to see you again. So I work at Merck as a senior scientist, and my focus is on drug metabolism and drug-drug interactions. And for my background, I was born in Mexico, and I immigrated with my family at the age of 8. I'm the oldest of six children. And a little bit about myself, I was actually a former DACA. So, applied for DACA, and then now I'm a U.S. citizen. I voted for the first time. When was it? Whenever Biden got elected. So that was very exciting. And I also got my PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from Rita is my former colleague. We were in the same lab, and I attended SACNAS for the first time, and I invited her to come over because I thought it was a great conference, and that's how she found the opportunity at Genentech, getting that internship, and then now as a fellow there. And since then, we've had other people as well from our program join SACNAS because they hear great things about it, and they know that they might get some opportunities available. So I'm looking forward to today's Fireside Chat, and I'm very excited to talk to everyone.
Thank you. We also have Kevin Keys. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kevin, he, him, his. I am currently a computational biologist at a company called Ambus Medicines. It's a startup based out of South San Francisco, just down the street from Genentech, actually. A bit about me. I believe I've been a SACNista since 2007. I actually don't remember SACNAS without Daniela, so that might be putting an age on us. I was born in Los Angeles. I moved to Tucson, Arizona when I was, I think, in the first grade, and grew up there. Did my undergraduate in mathematics and linguistics at the University of Arizona, and then had a brief stint in Europe before I did grad school at UCLA in scientific computing and genomics. And then I was a postdoc for about 3.5 years at UC San Francisco in asthma genomics. And now here I am at my current position. I guess I like SACNAS. This is actually a new thing for me, that there's a career con. Because when I was a student, SACNAS was actually, even then, pretty heavily academic based. I'm happy to be part of this particular development, and I'm happy for discussion and any questions you have today.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. And of course, we would love to welcome Catherine Velasquez is also joining us. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Catherine Velasquez, and I'm an associate director at Bristol Myers Squibb. And I grew up in San Jose, California, and I grew up in a Mexican family, and went to Eastside San Jose schools and attended San Jose State University, where I was the eldest of 5 kids to college. And I was the first to go to college on both sides of my family, and majored in molecular biology. And what's interesting is I actually lived at home while going to school, and had to help take care of my siblings. So when I was in college, actually, I had a newborn brother. So it was a lot of babysitting, and also working at my parents' dulceria in Eastside San Jose and selling piñatas and everything. So those were my weekends, working at the register and studying calculus and organic chem. And so while at San Jose State, I got really active, was involved, and joined SACNAS. It was about the year 2000. And I actually went to the SACNAS conference in San Francisco when it was held there. And while I was there, I also did internships at UC Irvine. And right out of school, I completed my bachelor's degree in molecular biology and started working. And I started working at Applied Biosystems. I did that for 6 months, and then I went to a startup called Evgenics. Did cell culture, which I loved because I really love my molecular bio lab. And from there, I then went to Genentech, which was my dream company. I had heard about it while taking molecular bio class, and I just thought it was so amazing that a company could synthesize insulin. And it's here, in South San Francisco, so it was exciting. And I was at working in cell culture. And while I was there, because of the opportunities they have with tuition reimbursement, I was able to take courses and actually move into regulatory affairs. So I was in regulatory affairs. I got to work on FDA packages, got to actually go to FDA meetings. It was really exciting. From there, I actually went to Stanford and worked in clinical research, doing pediatric oncology. So I got to see what it was like to work with physicians and pharmacists and nurses, like kind of see what's behind the screen, which was awesome, a great experience, but a little too close to the patients for me. So I knew I needed to go back to industry because, I just didn't have the heart for it. I went to another startup called Onyx. And there I actually transitioned into pharmacovigilance. And pharmacovigilance is where a company or a sponsor manages and monitors adverse events for products. And so when I went there, I actually would see all of the adverse events that would come in from all of our clinical trials. And I would fill out the documents that would get sent to FDA, EMA, MHA, MHRA, all of the regulatory authorities. So that was an amazing experience. And so through all of these experiences, my learning curve is steep, exciting, very enjoyable. But we got bought out by Amgen. And so then I made a move back to Genentech, but a totally different part of the company, pharmacovigilance, drug safety, but in training. So now I was getting to train the pharmacists, physicians, nurses, and scientists who are analyzing the data. And I did that for 5 years. And because it was a global role, I got to travel the world. Actually got my passport for the first time when I got this role. And my team was all in London area. So I got to go to London many times and really check off a lot of stuff on my bucket list, which was awesome. And from there, here I am. I went to Myocardia, another startup in South San Francisco. And I did quality compliance and training. And I really focused on making sure our department was ready for an inspection by FDA or any regulatory authority. But, we got bought out by Bristol Myers Squibb. So here I was 8 months later, acquired. So here I am. And now I'm focusing back on training and training physicians, pharmacists, and nurses vigilance at Bristol Myers Squibb.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you, Catherine. Incredible story. All right. Well, with that, we can get started. I think the first question that I have for all of you is, and you touched a little bit about where you are, but we want to hear, what were you thinking and feeling about your career in industry before you entered? Who would like to start?
So is that before? Oh, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I can start. I always, so I was very interested in staying in academia when I started my PhD. I thought that I was going to be a professor, but after some experiences that I had teaching as an adjunct faculty, I decided that, I want to try something else. And when I got the internship at Genentech, I feel like I always this perfect bubble. Like I feel like it was, a dream for me to join a company that will support doing research without having to be worried about funding and having all the resources to do all the research that you want. And I feel like I was really nervous that bubble was gonna shatter at some point. And so I feel like I was trying to test whether that was the reality or not. And I feel like I was pleasantly surprised that for the most part it was true. And so that was my experience before joining industry.
I was gonna say that for me, before joining industry, like when I was in graduate school, people, I think in the last session they asked like industry. So for me, I asked myself questions like, do I want to teach? Is that something I'm very passionate about? I'm like, no, not really. I don't mind teaching, but I think I like more mentoring, that just working with others, mentoring. So I thought that I could do that in industry. And then also, like, do I want to write grants? and is that going to be like my lifeline, whether I feel like a successful scientist or not? And I wrote a grant in graduate school, and I got it, a supplement grant for it was the NIH diversity supplement grant, and I got it, and it felt very fulfilling, to be able to get it. And that was great, but I was like, that's not something that I want to do, for the rest of my life. I think I wanted to be more like in the action where, there's science, we're discussing it, I'm influencing decisions and helping others learn, the type of work that I'm doing or mentoring. So I was like very certain that I wanted to go to industry, not sure exactly like what area, but I think just through my PhD, it just happened that the training that I got was very transferable to industry, and I actually really enjoyed it. I was thinking more before. I liked even in high school, I liked the science of beauty, like creams, formulations, ingredients. So I was thinking maybe I'll go to work at L'Oreal, I don't know, something like that. But then once I joined the PhD program and I started doing biomedical research, I saw how important it was, and it's something that interested me. Like, I think for me, I like challenges. I like to find solutions for problems. So I think wherever I am, I'm just going to make, the best out of it. And I was just very excited to finish my PhD and move on to industry and start. Of course, you're a little nervous at the beginning because you're like, okay, you talk to others, you get an idea, but you won't know the full you won't know like everything until you experience it. So once I joined, I was just trying to figure myself out and how I could get going, with my role. But yeah, I would say very excited, a little bit of nervous.
I must be the odd one out here because I decided as an undergrad that I would never work in industry, and yet here I am. I tried very hard to avoid it, very, very hard, to the point where, let's see. I mean, I don't know. My journey has been a lot of these very strange turns because, as I mentioned earlier, I studied math, and yet here I am in biotech and doing a lot of genomic data science. But I think that two pivotal turns in my career were in opportunities that I didn't take. And for one of them was as an undergrad, when I was applying to grad school, I actually applied in a very dark time. For those who remember, it was 2010. All the finances were in disarray in a lot of universities. It was part of the big recession. And I applied, I think, to 9 PhD programs, and I only got into one, and I didn't go. I actually deferred a year, took this leap of faith. That's the stint in Europe that I mentioned earlier. And reapplied later and got in, but I got in as a master's student. And so I had to really fight to stick around. But, I hacked it through and made it, and I was a postdoc. I was debating whether or not to pursue this academic route, right? And still didn't really want to go into industry. By that point, I'd met people that had been in it. They seemed happy. They seemed wealthy for what it's worth, compared to a postdoc salary. But, I wanted to do this academic thing. So I wrote an NIH Early Career Award. They call them K-class awards. And then the pandemic hit in early 2020. And everything at the NIH slowed to, a sludgy molasses crawl. And I wasn't certain that they would actually distribute the funding in time before my postdoc funding expired. And at that moment, because of my expanded network, being here in the Bay Area, talking to people who aren't necessarily in academics, I was actually lined up, for some of these open job positions. People said, hey, you should apply, talk to this person. The networking stuff ended up being really critical. I see a lot of nods because this gets repeated over and over and over. Your network is very, very, very critical. Anyways, I was interviewing and I got notice that I actually got a fundable score on this K award, and I didn't take it. I went to a company instead. I set aside that academic dream. I think I might have cried because it felt like I was giving up my dreams. But as Anna mentioned, you're a little nervous, whatever. But here we are on the other side, and I'm still here. I still do plenty of science. I feel like I'm a lot closer to science as a result. I'm not having to write the grants. And, it's a very doable thing. And take it from someone who tried as long as I could to really not go into industry. It's actually not that bad.
Yeah, I'll echo a lot of sentiments. What Yadira and Kevin and Anna said, it's like when I started, or the reason why I got into science was I didn't like science growing up. I was just okay at it, and I really didn't like it. I actually wanted to go to culinary school and ended up becoming a nutrition major and falling in love with chemistry, like in an intro to chemistry course. Um, and the reason for that was because faculty members like saw like, oh, I was asking good questions and right, like I was like, oh, this is what being a faculty member is like mentorship and finding people and really helping them find their potential. And then I went to I was right at a state school that was primarily teaching, and then I went to UC Berkeley for my PhD, and that kind of just like shattered like my academic aspirations. I was the first rotation and the first grad PhD student for my PI. And I really started seeing that the incentive structure in academia wasn't about mentorship. It wasn't about, you know, necessarily training the next generation, at least from what I was seeing. And I was like, I don't think this is for me. This environment isn't built for me. It's not here to necessarily support me. And the reason why I was able to get through it was like a lot of peer support. I was in a lot of training programs, right? Like fellowships that were geared at retention of underrepresented minorities and historically excluded identities. And that's what kept me through was my peers, but the institutions itself, I really felt like they didn't want me to succeed because of barriers that were put up. And so I was really disillusioned, and I was going to leave my PhD. Um, but then by some grace, I was able to finish in 4.5 years. And I actually took a gap year where I had really poor mental health. So trigger warning, mental health. Um, I was like really depressed at the end of graduate school. One of my queer mentors, another graduate student who was then doing a postdoc at UCSF, unfortunately lost their battle to suicide and mental illness. And that really put into perspective like what trauma and what abuse you go through in graduate school or in academia, and how like they really don't care. Like, and it's hard to say, but I say it because it's true. Like people look for help all the time, and the institutions like brush it off, or they don't give you enough support, or they make it extremely difficult to get mental health services through your healthcare. And so I was very privileged that somehow I saved money in graduate school, and I took a year off to work on my mental health, to figure out what I wanted to do in my life. And I traveled for like 6 months. I just backpacked around like Europe and Africa and saw my parents in the Philippines. And yeah, it really made me have some time to think about what I want to do. And I really wanted to impact, you know, research spaces and academic spaces, and still do that mentorship. And I thought, okay, well, if in academia I don't want to do that right now, I could go into industry and like do a postdoc, or because I know I was good at doing science. I was like, I could do bench work. And what I was like, if I could have a more like 9 to 5 job, I would be able to do these things extracurricularly. And I ended up at Genentech where I ended up meeting Catherine, and later on meeting Yadira, and really being able through their soft able to do mentorship at Genentech. And so that for me was one of my selling points of before going into industry was I told all the jobs, I'm here to do science, but at the same time, one, I'm going to protect my mental health because of these reasons. And two, I want to be able to do community work, or I want to do mentorship, and what opportunities do you have there? And so I looked into industry with, what are my values, and what are the questions, and what are the environments I want to put myself in. And it ended up working out for me for my first stint going into industry. And what I'd say here is, all the advice that, we're going to hear today is like, we all have different privileges. And I know for me that I was male bodied. I published well in grad school. I went to UC Berkeley, a well-known school. So I had all these privileges that I had to be able to leverage myself to get into a good position. But I also just want to throw that out there, right? Like any advice or any of our life experiences, you have to take everything with a grain of salt, because you don't necessarily have those identities or those privileges that I had or that other people here have in this discussion. But yeah, so that's what I was feeling from the beginning. And yeah, I talk long, so I'll try to keep my answers shorter moving forward, but that's kind of how I was feeling before I entered industry.
And
I'll just share to
Oh,
close
go
it out.
ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So I went straight to industry out of undergrad, and I just, I'm the first, I didn't know what I was, getting into. And I just put my resume online, kind of like Indeed, back in the early 2000s. And I just went to work at the first company that hired me. It was a contract role. And I thought, let me just jump in. And if I don't like it, I can change roles. And as you heard, I've had, various roles over my 20-year career, and they're all exciting. And I've learned from each of them. They've all built upon each other, so that now I have a great, a great view of the whole drug development process, and have been involved at various stages where, I didn't know about that when I was an undergrad. So I learned a lot of it. I just went for it, took the first job, and if I didn't like it, I applied for another, and ended up at Genentech. And while I was there, I did informational interviews. I think, like Kevin mentioned, networking, huge thing to do. A lot of companies have employee resource groups, and we had SACNAS at Genentech, so it was a great place to go to like-minded people. And also, there's mentorship programs at companies, and also just, sending a cold email to people, just saying, oh, they work in regulatory, they look nice, I'm just going to send them an email, ask them if they can have a quick 15-minute coffee chat. You know what? And everyone said yes. And so over the course of a year or two, I had met like 50 different people over coffee, learned so much about the industry. And I didn't learn this in school. I learned it when I was already there. So for me, I think I didn't know what I was getting into, but I just went for it. And while I was there, I explored. And here I am doing various roles.
Yeah, and I was gonna add that Merck provides 40 hours for community service outreach. So whatever you want to do, you have those 40 hours during the year, and you can also go in and report, those hours, because they look into like the service that we provide in terms of outreach and etc. And we can also donate to certain organizations, and they can match, what we give. So I feel like they provide great resources. And I would say that's probably among industry, like especially bigger companies provide more resources.
Yeah, I can confirm that. It's the same here.
Just really quick, there's one other thing I wanted to highlight that came from Kevin. Thank you for sharing like your K99. I'm assuming it's K99.
It's K01, but or similar class.
K01,
yeah.
Similar class. Yeah, I think if you're in academia right now as an undergrad or in grad school, and I had that like mid-career crisis, like my second year of grad school, when I decided I didn't want to be a faculty member. And when I graduated with my PhD, I was like, oh, I don't want to stay in academia. And if I told like just graduating Bria, starting their PhD, that by the end of this PhD, you would hate science and that you wouldn't remember, at the end of it, that I would be heartbroken. And so it took a lot of self-reflection that I feel like Kevin, you mentioned, and as well as others here. It takes a lot of self-reflection to make that decision to go out of academia when it seems like for the longest time, everyone's telling you that the only thing that, they want you here for is to be a faculty member. And it's really like disheartening. And I'm still like, if I'm honest, still at times disheartened that I didn't go down that route. Yeah, I'm back in academia right now, and I'm making an impact in the spaces that I'm here at Stanford. But that took a lot of like self-reflection and looking at my values. And, if you're making this decision, it's not necessarily that you're leaving academia forever, but you also want to make sure that you work through those feelings, and you work through, maybe that feeling that you're disappointing mentors or faculty advisors because, you know, you're not going down the academic route. And that was something that I struggled with a lot. Not only thinking I'm disappointing others, but also disappointing myself and my younger self. And so those were some of the feelings I felt also before coming into industry. And even to this day, I finished grad school 4 or 5 years ago now, and those are still feelings that I think about and I feel, but at the end of the day, I think I've had enough self-reflection to appreciate where I'm at right now, given my journey.
Yes, and I totally agree with what Brian just said, and I feel like one great venue for you to avenue, sorry, for you to try all those, potential interests that you have is through internships. I definitely recommend you, like, if you can do an internship during your PhD, either a company, or any other interest that you may have that will, like, give you clarity and make you feel like you are making an informed decision by the end of your PhD program.
I feel like Bria said something that caught my mind about disappointing people, and really the worst person you can disappoint is yourself. I felt like I'd be disappointing mentors or whoever, but if they're true mentors, then they want you to choose what's best for you, right? And so, I mean, one of the people that perhaps you should least be concerned about disappointing is a PI, especially, or anyone in grad school that you feel like hasn't really let you be you, hasn't let you bring your true self to what you do, right? They'll probably forget about you in 5 years anyways, right? And that's a very sardonic thing to say, but ends up being very true. I've seen this where a lot of PIs remember their legacies as the students that went on to become grant writing PIs, basically copies of themselves, right? But if you find gold, it's the people who remember who you were in your situation in grad school and how you chose your path and supported you continuously. I mean, in my case, that person is my graduate advisor. I had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful professor as a graduate advisor, and he never questioned my choices. He just said, you need to choose what you think is best for you. And, it sounds cheesy, it sounds cliche, people tell you all the time, but, there's also a lot of truth to it.
And Kevin, I just wanted to piggyback on that. I didn't have these sort of conversations because I wasn't in grad school, but it still happens now in industry, even with colleagues today. Exactly what you're saying. Choose
all the time.
Yeah. Whether you go to a startup, a big company, I think about my career over the last 20 years. At different points, I had different goals. At the beginning, it was to get the experience. Now I like work-life balance. Now I care what that salary number is. Things like that. I care about the 401k matching. And having these conversations with colleagues is actually common. And even being a cheerleader to my fellow colleagues to say, no, go, it's okay. So I think whatever career path you choose, you're always going to have this. Choose yourself and your family.
Thank you so much. I'm hearing excitement, fear, self-awareness, reflection. Fantastic. Just a reminder for everybody in our audience, we're saving the questions that you put in the Q&A to answer in the next session, in the QA session. So keep them coming. Now I'm curious to hear from you all, what was that experience like moving into those first weeks and months of your new sector in this new role? If you can talk a little bit about that.
Can I take the first stab here?
Please.
Mine is unusual, and I hope for the sake of everyone else that you don't have this experience, because I started in June 2020, which meant that for the first 3 months of my life, I knew all my colleagues as flat faces on my screen, the same screen that I'm using right now. I think I spoke with maybe 8 of them, and it was very isolating, right? That was pandemic life, I think. I don't anticipate that it'll be quite as common in the future unless you're a permanent remote worker. But it was definitely a shock, and it was a reminder that there is some value if you are personally able to handle it, or you're like me, I'm extroverted. I do crave interaction with people. There is some value in having the person-to-person contact, and actually, it was the start of me realizing that a lot of what makes industry life, or really any job, is what makes it make or break. They're really the people you work with. And so it took me a long time to be able to make those relationships with coworkers, because at the beginning, it was me sitting in this very seat with this very computer, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do in this shiny new company. And it was very isolating.
I would say for me, so I started in July 2020, so it was also during the pandemic. Since I'm a bench scientist, I was essential staff, and I was able to go in on site, and I could see people, but it felt like a ghost town. Like compared to when I went to interview, you wouldn't see that many people. Some of the options for the cafeteria were closed because there was less people. So I would say it was strange times. But what I liked about my hiring manager was that in the first month or so, she scheduled meetings with certain individuals that she thought it would be good for me to get to know them um, uh, from my department. So some were in San Francisco, some were in Boston, and some people were on site in Rahway, New Jersey, where I started. So I felt like even though those were virtual, because they were far away, and I think at that time we weren't really meeting in person. It was everything. I would see people walking around or in the lab, which was nice. But it was mainly, through like whatever Zoom or WebEx or Microsoft Teams. But I did like that my hire manager scheduled those meetings so that way I could to get to know people. And then from there, they would be like, oh, you should talk to this person. And then I would follow up with that person. And that just kind of helped me increase my network and my connectivity and find the different opportunities available. Like I was able to join different exploratory projects just through talking to people and networking, aside from what I do to support the pipeline. So, and also the first month, you do so many trainings. I don't know, I had 60, 70 trainings, like learn how to water a compound or etc. So I spent pretty much the first month doing trainings and networking with people. And then from there, I started kind of looking at the science, getting ready, to do my experiments. So I started in July. I think my first experiment was in September. So it was July, August, and probably by September. So it took me about 2.5 months, because you can't go into the lab until you finish all your trainings. If you work in a place where there's radioactivity, even though if you don't work with it, you need to get clearance for your batch, etc. So there's a lot of administrative tasks that you got to do, and you stay busy. And they did give me the option to work from home, but I wanted to go in just to feel some structure, see some people, and then also give my family an opportunity for them to figure out their schedule without me. And I felt like that was good.
Yeah, I guess I could go next. I started my industry postdoc December 2018. And yeah, I had a lot of different feelings. I think the first one was, so overall Genentech was a really great place to work. But there was just, as everywhere in STEM, right, it's not really diverse in people that you see around. And so my team was like, I'm Asian, right? But I'm like very brown. I'm like Southeast Asian. And my floor was like, predominantly, white and East Asian, like Chinese, Korean, Japanese, in those areas. And so it wasn't really diverse. There was like one Black scientist a floor below me, but basically my whole building was not diverse. And so that was the first feelings I had when I started at Genentech, and noticed that more of the brown people or the Latin people were working in the manufacturing side. They were the ones putting on the scrubs and doing more of the like technical manual labor in manufacturing. And so that was just like a really interesting perspective that I had when I first started. And I would go to different events, and Genentech has its own campus. It's really big. And so they have like a gym where there's also like a lot more Filipino people who work at the gym, you know, like at the reception or doing things. And I went to an event that was like, I think it was like a queer panel or something along those lines. And I went in, and then the person checking people in asked, like, looked at me and asked, like, "Oh, do you work at the gym?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And they're like, "Oh, do you work at the gym?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm a postdoc. I work in this building." And they were just like shocked, right? Like it was like, and it was another brown person that was saying this to me. But it was just like this perception, right, of like, oh, the way that you look or the way that you come through is like, oh, they assume that you are, you know, not doing science, or you're not, you know, in a scientist role. And, you know, I could see those perceptions, but those were like some of my first experiences. I was just like, what is this? I already left academia, and I was already feeling some sorts of ways about it. And then I get there, and I was like, okay, I'm in this like capitalistic company. I left Berkeley, which is all about like being liberal against like big pharma, and now I was part of big pharma. And so it was a lot of different feelings. And then Lindsay, who gave, I think she talked yesterday, Lindsay Silva, saw me and was like, oh, I met you at Sockness event. You should join our Sockness chapter. And that's where I was able to find more community. And so at these companies, they do have like employee resource groups, or like identity-based groups, and they were able to bring me in, and that's where I was like able to find like more people I identify with, and more people I could vent with, and more people that I can, more people I would be able to like talk about these racist things that were happening to me. And so I was really happy that I was able to find that. But basically, wherever you're going to go, you know, hopefully you're able to find a community within those spaces. And, you know, that brought me Catherine, that brought me Adira. And so I felt very like lucky that I was able to like have a space to be authentically pissed off, and not feel like I have to be like, you know, code switching and just like brushing microaggressions off, that I had a place to be able to vent about my experiences. So that was like the first maybe like 2 months of like these really weird things that were happening, and then being able to find community to make me feel further supported in the space.
Yeah, I guess for me, my first weeks of as an intern, I take that as my first industry experience. They were filled with a lot of imposter syndrome. A lot of the interns that were at the company, they came from bigger universities, like well-known academic places, and I was coming from a less known, a smaller program, and I just felt like I didn't belong here. You know, it was really hard for me as well. You know, added to the fact that, as others have mentioned, there I was the only Latino in my whole department. As Dave said, you know, I've seen Latino people in the cafeteria, and that was about it. I feel like in that sense, it was really hard to feel that I belong in that place. But, you know, I had to work through my own biases and through my own feelings and let that on aside, and just, you know, I know I was good at science, and I know I was gonna do good at what I was hired for. So I tried to focus my energy on that and let aside all those feelings. And, you know, at the end, I thrived, and they offered me to come back to the company for a full-time position.
What about for you, Catherine?
Yeah, I was thinking, started quite a bit ago, right after my undergrad, but I think my mentality back then was work hard. You know, I was right out of school, and my job was very technical. It was synthesizing DNA on the synthesizer machines. And then my next job was cell culture. So it was like becoming a fit. It was more learning that not just working harder, but working smarter is something to do. And of course, that's my mantra now: work smarter, not harder. But in the beginning, I didn't know that because I was used to working harder. My family owned a business and I was just used to seeing that, just work longer hours, work harder. I was sometimes at work in the lab, 12 hours a day. And, but no one sees that, it's only for my own, making me feel good, getting work done. But I was really not going anywhere. But those who work more efficiently will get further. So that's something I've learned. And I guess it's interesting you talk about, where you went to school. So I went to San Jose State, and here I am with, even physicians as coworkers, colleagues with PhDs, from big schools around the world. And they're my colleagues. And I just think, wow, I'm doing this, I can do it. And I have done it. And I think in the beginning it was interesting and kind of scary, but by now I just think, hey, I'm here, I'm doing it. And it's not about, it's about you taking the chance, taking, I won't say having ganas, but, just doing it and just getting in there. And I think that's why for me, for all my roles, even though I have an undergrad, I'm getting to work with the best people in the world, and they're great colleagues. And I think it definitely took time to say to myself, I believe I can do it. And here I am.
It's worth underscoring. Hopefully you have many takeaways in the audience from this particular chat, but Catherine's story highlights that, there is still a little bit of titleism in industry, in academia, right? Everyone expects you to get all these degrees. And certain places in industry are similar, but also, I have coworkers that don't have the degrees that I do, but they have significant years of experience, and I go to them because they have the knowledge, right? And experience ends up being extremely important, right? It's valued in those job ads. They ask for years of experience. Whether or not that's necessarily the best metric, what they're really asking for is, do you know what you are doing? Do you have practice in doing what you're doing? And so for those of you who don't have terminal degrees or high degrees, you should know that you still have places in the industry, right? You may not start at the same place, but life sort of progresses at the same time for all of us, right? I have colleagues that had similar workplace experiences to me in numbers of years, and I was one with a PhD. We still have similar titles, right? So don't fear people who happen to have PhDs, right? Hopefully they're good people, really, hopefully. But experience is going to matter a lot. And so, Catherine, this point about working with physicians, stuff like that, we all go through this, and it can be kind of intimidating, but don't fear that. I mean, keep at it, keep hacking at it, and you also can rise and have a solid upward career in industry.
Thank you. And yeah, it's perfect. It makes me curious, I guess, too, to think about what it was like when things were feeling right for you. What was happening around you that made you feel? I heard a little bit of you touching on, some of the struggles in the beginning. What about now? And what are some of the things that you recognize that you see and are happening for you when you're feeling good?
I mean, you get engrossed in the work. I have a lot of analysis to do. When this particular session is done doing all the stock and stuff, I turn back to my work, and you get lost in it. And that's generally a good thing, right? It means that you like what you do. I have, people at work that I like to see as well. I keep in touch with them, sometimes over private messages. That aspect of camaraderie and fun, I think, is, if you have that, you can sustain that, then you're probably in a good spot.
Yeah, and I actually have, speaking of keeping in touch, colleagues that I used to work with at Genentech that have gone on actually to other jobs. We have a standing meeting on Fridays just to check in, like over coffee. So it's kind of a friend check-in, a work friend check-in. So it's really cool. And I guess you were just mentioning some of the good things. Well, I've been taking, actually, I like the work-life balance of work as well. Actually, I'm taking 2.5 weeks off right now. And, I had just mentioned we had gotten my company had gotten purchased. Actually, I am just moved into my new home on Friday. So I'm actually, so I'm the first home buyer in my whole family. So exciting. So many perks, and like this happen. It makes me happy to do my job and do what I love and interact with people.
I would say for me, when things were feeling maybe like a little bit uncertain or unknown, was that when I started my role, I got hired in New Jersey. We bought a house, etc. I moved my family, and then within a month, in a lab group meeting, my manager started discussing there might be a potential move to Pennsylvania because there's consolidation of 2 sites in New Jersey, and that site's getting closed down, and they need space for those people to come to where we're at. And they're discussing whether they want to move this part of the department to Pennsylvania because we're kind of all over the place. So that was very uncertain for me, and I'm like, I just bought a house, it was very overwhelming. It was either okay, I move, I try to find a job within Rahway, the New Jersey site, or I find a job outside, a different company. And they really tried to keep me. So they were like, what can we do to kind of help you with that process, etc. And the goal was for me to move this summer, so 2022. And I told my manager, if my daughter was in, I think, let me see, she was in 8th grade. I'm like, once she starts high school, I really don't want to move her. That was kind of my compromise to her. And I would like to keep my word. And then also my husband had gotten unemployment because in Washington, if your spouse gets a job somewhere else, you can get unemployment. So I'm like, once he finds a job, it's going to be really hard for me to move again, just because, I don't want to be moving my family all over the place. And I'm like, it has helped that it was COVID. So they were doing hybrid. They weren't really meeting new friends. So I told them, like, I just don't know if I can move. So they proposed that I move early, and then that's why I moved last summer. So I was in New Jersey for 11 months, not a long time. But I could see the perks of moving over here. There's more people with my expertise over here. So I could get to know them better, work in different working groups. And in the group that I was in, the focus, it's called Transporters and In Vitro Technologies Group. And I was more in the in vitro and entomology. And it was very heavy on the transporter. So even though I was in that group, I didn't really feel like I belonged because I wasn't really interacting with them. I was interacting with people from San Francisco, from Boston, from Pennsylvania. And I had one mentor there, and she's retiring this year. So I was like, where do I see myself? She's retiring. I'm the only one. But I kind of saw the opportunity that if I would move over here, I would get to meet like my people, the people that I do that type of work, and I could collaborate more closely with them. So in terms of my career, it aligns better. And then they provided a great relocation package. They paid for all, for me to sell my house and the closing cost to buy a new house. So I was very interested in terms of financially, if it was going to make sense for my family. And my husband really wanted to see that. But once we got that, they were like, okay, yeah, we'll move. And I would say when I feel great, I think it's just interacting with people. And what I did when I started was get into those employee resource groups and join them, so I could start getting to know people from different areas, but also find people that I could relate to. And I've made great friendships. I've met with some people now that I moved to Pennsylvania. And in terms of work-life balance, I would say they really strive for you to be good. In terms of they want you to do the science, but they also want you to have a life. And right now I'm pregnant, so I'm having I have 2 daughters, and they're, let me see, 10 and 14. So they're pretty old, pretty independent. And we have discussed of having another baby, but I wanted to go finish my PhD, get a job and get some stability. And now I'm pregnant, and they provide 4 months and a half of maternity leave, and then 2 weeks before your due date. And they're already, we're discussing who's going to take over, my responsibilities. And I think it's also going to provide an opportunity because they're getting people for me to train them on what I do. But they're like, once you come back, they're going to be trained, and you can think about like bigger and better things that you can do. So expanding my role. So I feel like it's not like it's affecting my career, because a lot of times people think you're taking time off, and being a woman, and of course it's hard. I'm gonna have to navigate certain hurdles. But I had my first daughter when I was 19, so I feel like I've already had my fair share of struggles and things I've had to overcome. So nothing really faces me nowadays.
I agree. Whenever things start feeling good, I feel like I start enjoying more my work. Whenever I saw that being in industry, you can have more work-life balance than way more than I had when I was in academia. I feel like that's when I was like, I knew I made the right decision. I also just came back from maternity leave. I have a 4-month-old, and the company has been great supporting with maternity leave and resources to support new parents. So yeah, it's just brighter on the other side now.
Congrats. What about for you, Bria? Speaking of some of these topics, is there anything that pleasantly surprised you about working in industry?
Yeah, I think industry as compared to like academia is just a lot more adult. I think I definitely felt going through grad school, right? I still felt like a kid, right? Like, oh, I'm a student, like I'm not an adult. And I see faculty members who don't act like adults, right? They're like throwing temper tantrums at meetings if they don't get their way, and like they like don't know how to run their groups, and they're abusive in ways that if that was happening in industry, it just would not happen. And I think that was the pleasant surprise was, oh, HR actually has some teeth in industry. Like there are things you cannot do that happens from my experience or from my perspective a lot in academia. And it's like these people stay in academia because probably if they went into industry, they wouldn't last because they don't know how to act professionally. And so I think that was a real pleasant surprise was actually working and seeing at all levels people acting professional. Granted, there's people that don't in industry, but there are like routes to take that like will reprimand them, where in academia I feel like there is no repercussions if you're doing things for the most part. It's like so much more difficult to get anyone in trouble for doing things that are inappropriate, where if things are happening that are inappropriate in industry, it's like legal is involved, HR is involved, right? Like there's a lot of things that happen, and I feel like because of that, the mentorship that ends up happening is a little bit better because the mentors or my PI was thinking, not only about my scientific development, but my personal development and like where I wanted to go with my career. And, by 12 months into my job, I was doing great work, and my PI sat me down as a postdoc and was like, you're really good at doing science. If you want to stay on this track, I think you would do really great if you want to do this. But I could tell that your passions just lie elsewhere, like doing more community work, doing more diversity work, because I was able to be honest with him about extracurricular things that I was doing. And so I think that's what surprised me was that in industry, they know people will leave. Like there's turnaround, and that if you're a good manager or you're a good mentor, you're ensuring that the people that are working on your team are being developed and are going to be able to move on. Where I really feel like in academia, there's a time when people really try to squeeze out every last bit of productivity they can out of you before you leave. And that may happen in industry, but I really feel like there's just a lot more structures in place to make it a little bit better to transition in terms of like moving around in industry. And then of course there's like the money, which is a lot nicer or a lot more abundant than in academia. And one of the things I'll just leave off on is right, people saying stay in academia and do this because it's your passion. Like, that's a huge amount of privilege to say, don't make $50,000 to $100,000 more in your next role so that you could stay in academia, when especially historically excluded group or community, right? You're taking care of your family, you're taking care of your parents, you're taking care of kids. Anna, you just mentioned, right? You had a kid when you were 19. Like, most people in grad school don't have kids and don't have those responsibilities. But if you're coming from communities where having kids early on is part of your culture and part of your values, then you have to think about money. And I think academia is really lacking in understanding that if you want to bring historically excluded people into grad school, into a postdoc, into a faculty position, you can't make us train for like 15 years making $50,000 to $70,000, when in the same amount of time, I'll give Catherine as an example. I don't know Catherine's salary structure, but I'm sure having a bachelor's and then now all of her experiences of going through that has made hand over fist a lot more money than I did as a graduate student, and then if I ended up doing an academic postdoc. And so, I mean, I'm back in academia now, and these are things that I'm trying to like push for, but right, it's like the system is built on cheap labor, and unfortunately, being cheap labor is a privilege because you have families that could take, like, you have parents that have retirement plans, you have a nanny, you have, right, family wealth that you're able to not make money. Whereas if you're coming from immigrant backgrounds or historically excluded backgrounds, you don't have that financial safety net that then they wonder why we leave. It's because you could literally throw money at it if academia wanted to keep more people in, but that's not what their values lie. And so, right, they pay the presidents of universities millions of dollars. They pay faculty tons in retention packages. But then to think about the pipeline of paying grad students $5,000, $10,000 more a year, that's like gonna break the system. And so, anyways, that's my soapbox. I'll let other people talk. So that's the pleasant surprise. Money is great, and there's a reason why people are leaving academia, because there's not enough money to support, your family.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This is fantastic conversation. I know we're a little bit over, but the good thing is that it does not end here. There will be a Q&A. So just to close out this session here, I just want to thank you again, Kevin, Bria, Yadira, Anna, and Catherine. Thank you so much for this conversation. I know we could keep going. I want the fire started, but we will continue the conversation in the Q&A. Thank you so much for being here, and we will continue on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
See you in
you.
bed.
Looking forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you.
Me too. Thank you all.